that high five. Come on. Inside the 10. Head first. He dives inside the 5-yard line.
Rushing forward, ball comes out of the hands of Newton. It's on the ground and still on the ground. Picked up by T.J. Ward at the 4-yard line.
Davis gets 19 to McCaffrey with a 19-yard reception. But Terrell again for at least 19 and more than that. Inside the 10, touchdown Denver.
All week long, Marty Schottenheimer talked to his...
Manning out of the gun. Manning lets it fly. It's caught by Thomas. There's the record for Peyton Manning.
Saludos and salutations, Broncos Country, and welcome to another exciting episode of Broncos Talk. I'm your host, Adan Diaz, and joining me, as always, to my right is at Richie. Richie, how you doing today, my friend?
Not bad. How you doing?
I'm doing all right, Richie. Before we get started with today's show, just want to give out a couple of announcements, and also a shout out to the boss Mundungus for filling in from my spot last week. You guys did a great job. You guys knocked it out of the park. And, it was great. It was kind of weird seeing myself from the other side, watching you guys while I was on vacation. But you guys knocked it out of the park. And you guys also set a world record, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of the longest syndicated episode of Broncos Talk. So congratulations to both of you guys. But with that being said, guys, just want to remind you that if you like what you see here tonight, make sure you subscribe, hit that thumbs up button wherever you're watching us on social media. And remind you that Broncos Talk goes live every single Tuesday at 7654. We also have our flagship show, the MHRT podcast, which broadcasts at the exact same time, 7654. And we also have the Nothing Rhymes With podcast on Fridays that also airs at 7654. And then we also have the brand new show, The Neighborhood. It's the pregame show that airs just before every single Broncos game. Now, keep note, guys, that because this is the Broncos bye week, there will not be a pregame show this week. So keep that in mind. But we will have a brand new episode for you guys next week when the Broncos come back to work and they play against the Chargers. So with that being said, Rich, unfortunately, you and I talked about this before the show. We were kind of hoping to start today's show, coming in, revved up, hyped up. Let me tell you something. Everybody was hyped up. I was at the Cowboys game, and even though a lot of people were talking smack and, saying that the Broncos were going to get whooped or whatever, they went in there. Broncos Country represented, and it was a whole totally different outcome. The energy inside that stadium was amazing, and it was the exact same energy that everybody brought to Mile High this past Sunday. And unfortunately, against the team that the Broncos should have won or beat against the Philadelphia Eagles, it didn't turn out that way. And everything that we feared would happen against the Cowboys, it kind of flip-flopped, and it happened against the Eagles. And that's a really bad thing, Rich, because the Eagles are a team that the Broncos were supposed to win, and not just at home, mind you, but just in general. We thought that we finally got to, turn a page and see a different side of the Broncos, basically the side that we wanted to see since week one, but we didn't see this past Sunday. And heading into the bye week, Rich, I think that's going to set off more issues and more worries than, calm, cooler heads.
Yeah, well, I mean, what the real issue is for me ultimately was that we changed our game. So we came out of the Cowboys game and saw what worked. We played heavier tight end sets. We mixed it up on the defensive line in order to stop a run game, and we played well, really well, actually, in terms of on almost all three sides of the three phases of the game. At the very least, we at least played really well on both the offense and defense, which is arguably the two most important. Although special teams can really lose you a game if you stink it up. So we moved into the Eagles game, and I personally expected that Shermer, and then, even though he was on the COVID list, would have at least had an initial game plan put out that simply would have just written on his notes and said, do this against the Eagles, basically as an offensive game plan. And I would have expected both Fangio and Donatell to come into this game and say, well, hey, what worked against the Cowboys is likely going to work about the division, rivals and the Eagles. At least let's start off the game that way to clog up the run lanes and really, do right by our team. Needless to say, both sides of the ball decided to play to the Eagles as opposed to play to the Broncos and force the Eagles to kind of overcome what we were putting in front of them. And as a result, we absolutely just got spanked.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree with you there, Rich. And it's really disappointing when you think about it, because when you look at our division right now, the Broncos were one of the very few teams that a lot of analysts at the beginning of the season were slated to make a run for the division, give the Chiefs a run for their money. And so far in the very first half of the season, Rich, the Broncos have just been a roller coaster ride, up and down, up and down, up and down. And the crazy thing about it is, even going into our bye week, we're still in the very thick of things. Even if the Chiefs, the Raiders, and the Chargers win their games next week, the Broncos are still mathematically in the run to win that division. So, the reason I say that is because as soon as the Broncos lost that game, a lot of people kind of started regressing back to that toxicity that I really hate seeing in Broncos country, which is, fire Vic Fangio, fire Pat Shurmur. Even though Pat Shurmur wasn't at the game, people still wanted him to be fired for some reason. Fire Tom McMahon. I mean, that one I can agree with. I've been on board from that one at the beginning. But I'm going to reiterate something that I've talked about and I've said before on the show, that right now, firing the head coach, especially, Pat Shurmur is one thing. But if you fire Vic Fangio at this point in time, you're basically telling everybody in that locker room that the season is lost.
Right, exactly.
So, and you don't want to do that. A lot of people criticize George Paton for how he handled the situation with Von Miller and, bringing in Kenny Young and Stephen Weatherly. So with those guys being added, we cannot give up on this team yet until the Broncos are legit, technically, mathematically eliminated and there's no chance for them to make the postseason. Which, even so, I don't see them making any drastic moves. I'll probably wait until the end of the season for Black Monday, especially with one more game being added this season. So a lot can still happen in the second half, guys. If the Broncos can go out and beat a team like the Cowboys, we can only hope that this loss was just a fluke and that the Broncos can kind of get their stuff together in this bye week, rejuvenate themselves, heal up, kind of brainstorm and just come back and have a better, strong second half. And, to bring up a good point, look at the Bucs last season. Last season, the Bucs started off really poorly. They went into their bye week. They came out, all cylinders firing. And then, they made it all the way and won the Super Bowl. So let's not give up on this team yet, guys. I know everybody should be pissed off. We're going to talk about the whole Teddy Bridgewater situation and the Mike Shula plays and everything. But we have to remember that even though this team lost, they are far from out of it. And as much as we want to sit here and blame and point fingers at whose fault, at the end of the day, you can blame whoever you want. But we have to kind of find a way to win because this season is far from over yet, Rich.
Right. The only pushback I'm going to have on that is if we are mathematically eliminated as a team, we may consider firing the coaches that we absolutely just say you're done. Like we don't want you here anymore. And I think ultimately that could be someone like Tom McMahon, where we might promote maybe his coordinator to see what they can do, and maybe they're a better option for us. And then the other option there for us is that we've now seen Shula and we've seen Shurmur. We're going to get into that a little bit later in terms of what we saw offensively and whatnot for our team. However, what might be interesting is to say, hey, can, say, Mike Munchak step up as a better offensive coordinator, because we do know he has an offensive prowess to him as well. And there's a legitimate possibility that if he steps in and, say, wins out the season, although that will really tank our draft options, but if he does step in and win out the season, one, I think it'll show that the Elway and Peyton kind of control over who starts and who stays and all that kind of stuff was clearly a broken model. And B, I think it'll show that we should have made that change likely earlier in the season, because if Munchak can do that with our player personnel that we have on our team, with the roster that we have right now, and win, that just shows that we were not adapting properly.
And I totally agree with you there. And, as I pulled up some of the comments while you were talking here, Rich, there's a lot of people in Broncos country that agree. And I actually want to address Dave Glassman, who says, the last time I checked, we don't have Tom Brady, which is true. We don't. But what we desperately needed is somebody that had leadership like Tom Brady. See, the thing that makes Tom Brady such a really great quarterback, aside from his Super Bowl wins, is the fact that he can implore his leadership on that team. Granted, he has really great weapons and that Bucs offense, but that's exactly what Peyton Manning did when he came to Denver back in 2012. He came because his leadership made that offense even better. His play calling, his audibles, everything that Peyton Manning did for the team from 2012 to 2015 was just amazing. And if you go back and watch it, just watch how Peyton Manning works, how his mind works, was just amazing. And if it wasn't for that, that surgical procedure that unfortunately just took away any future he had with the Broncos, we would have gotten more years out of Peyton Manning. And who knows, maybe still to this day, we could still be seeing, Peyton Manning and Tom Brady throwing the ball and still having matches against each other. But with that being said, guys, let's talk about a little bit more about the game.
Jump in there, just if you don't mind.
No, please.
So the problem. So what makes Tom Brady so unique is his ability to read defenses, because he's basically seen it all at this point in his career. I mean, he's been playing forever. But in terms of football years, he's basically half mummy. And that's cool. But Tom Brady's seen it all. And what makes Tom Brady so unique is his ability to interpret and read the defense and make the plays and dissect it and get the ball out quickly. Tom Brady's also somewhat unique in the fact that he is clearly aging and old, but he hasn't really lost a ton of velocity on the football. In fact, some even argue, and I actually made a comment at the beginning of this season, at least, that I actually thought that he was throwing the ball harder than I've seen in years past, which, is completely turned on its head for an older quarterback like that. Now, conversely, when we're talking about Teddy Bridgewater and what we've seen from Teddy Bridgewater this year, and just in general, and if I can just kind of pull up, say what Dave has pulled up there in terms of proved he isn't a leader and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I actually agree. And that was a comment that I made, I believe, in our group chat, or I at least made on Twitter to a couple people as well, is when you do something what Teddy did there, you've immediately lost the trust of the locker room. And what's really, really interesting is when you see Kliss's tweets, Mike Kliss on Twitter, is he's trying so hard not to just come out and say that. And so he's taking a tweet that should be exactly as long as what Dave Glassman just put out there in like 2 lines, and he's made it a novel and a half on Twitter, which he's just banking that so many people on Twitter want to see 2-line tweets that they're just going to skim over it and ignore it. But I read it, and he was like, he's got a long way to go. He's going to eventually get back there, and he's already made the first step by admitting that he was wrong. And so if you read through all the lines there, basically the locker room is pretty pissed off the fact that he did that. Fangio called him out in the middle of a meeting, and he has proven as a leader that he is not willing to put himself in harm's way to help the team win. And yet we've seen so many other Broncos players do so. Look at our injury report in terms of who's on IR. Every single one of those players was willing to put themselves into harm's way to try and get the Broncos to win. They paid the price for it. And now you have active players on the roster who's watching their leader on the team watch a guy go by him, and then his effort was he leaned his shoulder in, 5 inches to push him inside to allow someone else to make the tackle. That's unacceptable.
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue into the point I was going to make, Rich, and you beat me to it. So great minds think alike. And this is a topic that's been all over Broncos country for the last 2 days. And it's really, Broncos country has always been divided on a lot of issues, Rich, but I believe that this is one where, no matter where you stand, there's no right or wrong, because as you said, I've watched that play so many times. And, in our group chats, we've had heated discussions as to where we feel Bridgewater should have done. Now, while me personally, I don't feel that Bridgewater should have dove, but I believe he should have done something else in terms of, stick an arm out, try to, push the guy that was pushing him. Try to
What
do
I said is
something.
I want Bridgewater in his way.
Yeah,
So
try to do
he
something.
had an angle to run
Yeah,
in front of him
in terms of
that
play.
slows him down from making it all the way and doing that cutback, which ultimately
Mhm.
allowed him to make the touchdown, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That is what my point was, is that and sorry to kind of interject, but you have basically two options there if you're Teddy Bridgewater. Or actually three. He opted for door number 3, which is the absolute wrong choice. But he had really 3 options. One was tackle him outright, which I actually can agree that is a risk-reward scenario, which may not be the best option for both him and the team. I can appreciate the potential of not making that play, although it certainly would have been a statement move. And if you want your team to rally, if you tackle the guy and prevent a pick 6, I can guarantee you the entire bench is getting cleared and you have a different outcome in the game probably because your team is now riled behind you. Now, the other alternative, which is kind of more in the middle, we'll call him Steady Teddy, and you call him that for a reason. So you expect somewhere in the middle, which would be exactly what I just said. Jump in front of him, put your body in the way and force him to go around you. That slows him down and enables guys like Melvin Gordon, Tim Patrick, who, by the way, booked it from all the way in the very back end of the field there to try and catch him. A guy like Tim Patrick will absolutely catch up to a guy like Slay there if he's being slowed down and having to run around a guy like Teddy Bridgewater.
Yeah, and the reason I don't cut Teddy Bridgewater any slack is because, I mean, think about it, Rich. What do the punters have to do every single time they punt the ball?
Yep.
If the person getting the ball is coming right at them, and the punter does what Teddy Bridgewater does, they don't have a job the next day, or they get chewed out. We've seen a bunch of times they've put their bodies on the line, and they're not guys that are meant to take that type of hit. Punters are kind of like quarterbacks. They have thinner frames. They're not big guys. They're not meant to take hits, but they put themselves out on the way to prevent the opposing team from scoring a touchdown. So the whole thing with Bridgewater is, as the leader, as we keep saying, he should have done something where even if he didn't stop Darius Slay himself, he should have made an attempt. And to me, what I think was going through his head was he was probably thinking that, maybe Melvin Gordon's knee was down. Maybe there was a flag called. Maybe there was something called where he didn't need to go out and, put his body on the line and possibly get injured. Because when you see that playback and you look at it,
that's the business decision.
Yeah, that's the business decision.
That's the business decision.
And it's a really bad one.
I don't know. You're a football player.
Yeah, and it's really bad. And I'm pretty sure when he was sitting there talking to the press and they're asking him about it, and I'm pretty sure he's seen that replay, Rich. There is no way in hell that man has not seen that play go down.
Fangio played it the next day for the team.
Yeah.
And Teddy's play was for all to see.
Yeah. And it's just really, really bad. It's really bad for Bridgewater because a lot of people were still. I'm telling you, I feel like he won a lot of people over in that Dallas game because he went out there and did what nobody expected him to do. And then when you go into this Philly game at home and you expect to see that same caliber of gameplay and put that out on the field and you get regression, you get even worse, and then you add that on top of that. That's not really the type of guy you want to hand the franchise keys over and say, here, you're the guy to lead this team into the promised land. And
I think the underlying tone there, as you were basically stating there, but if I can take over the word that was touted from the Dallas game, was we saw the Broncos put forth legitimate effort, true effort. You could visually see it on the field. There was urgency and there was effort. And then when you saw a play like that from Teddy Bridgewater, when the game was still well within our grasp, if we had stopped them we were on our way to potentially score there. So, we had a real missed opportunity as a result of that fumble, and he did nothing.
Yeah, he did absolutely nothing.
And so that was a lack of effort, which is in direct contrast to the praise that he and the entire team had received all week. And I think that has partially contributed to so many of the fans flipping. They went right from okay, I think we've got this. I think there's a path forward for us, et cetera, et cetera. And then now you have the complete flip side 180 of what are you doing? What is wrong with you? Did you not listen to, the general fans? Did you not listen to the praise that you were getting for effort? At least show it. If he tried to tackle him and couldn't bring him down or something like that, people are going to say, dude, at least you tried.
Mm-hmm.
You're a quarterback. We don't necessarily expect you to be a linebacker. So, I mean, that's cool, but at least you tried. And instead, what did we get from Teddy? Nothing.
Exactly. And you know what?
Yeah.
A friend of mine actually pointed it out to when he saw that play of what he thought of. I don't know if you ever seen the movie Spider-Man, but in the scene where he gets paid and the mugger runs out of the guy's office and Tobey Maguire just kind of stands to the side and lets the mugger run past him.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he compared it to. And I mean, I thought it was so stupid, but I started laughing because I was like, when I thought about it, I'm like, well, that's actually
he's not far off.
He's not far off. So, even though that went a whole totally different way, but like the comparison it's actually like it's so true and it's so close to being true that it's
if I can even
hilarious.
commandeer your buddy's comparison there.
Mm-hmm.
In Teddy's post-game presser, he made a comment saying, I was just trying to steer him inbound so that somebody else could make the tackle. In that Spider-Man movie, which I am familiar with, he said, well, it's not my problem.
Yeah.
Right? Do you remember that was his quote in the movie? Well, it's not my problem. So I would have to say your friend is pretty much bang on in his reference, and let's give him a shout out for I think the best correlation that we've been able to find to the Teddy Bridgewater no tackle or no effort.
Yeah, shout out to you, Julius, for making that hilarious comment to me yesterday. But and that kind of drives us or takes us into the next point about Teddy Bridgewater, and that's the gameplay. And this is something that you and I talked about before we went live, Rich.
Yes.
And basically, Teddy Bridgewater kind of regressed and going back into the check down version of himself. And as much as I don't know if it was him or if it was, the fact that it's a Mike Shula type of offense, because I kept having to remind myself, this isn't Pat Shurmur calling the plays, this is Mike Shula. So while the running game did improve under Mike Shula, I will give him that. I don't know if it was Teddy Bridgewater making those calls, but I want to say that I think it is, because even when Pat Shurmur was calling the plays, this is the type of Teddy Bridgewater we saw in the preseason, and that had us all a little bit worried going into the offseason, saying we cannot keep going and doing all these checkdowns constantly and expecting to, move the ball. So to me, that was really disappointing in seeing Teddy Bridgewater not letting the ball fly and not taking chances. There was somebody on Twitter that says your wide receivers are literally taller than the cornerbacks covering them, and you're not giving them a chance to make a play for the ball. Cortland Sutton's a tall guy. Tim Patrick is a tall guy. Noah Fant, he might not be the tallest guy, but he's a big guy, and he can more than always go for the ball if you put it where you need to be. So for me, I think that Teddy Bridgewater took a giant step backwards in that regard against this Philadelphia defense.
So I have a question on this one. Jay Bryan, I really appreciate you coming in here, and lots of comments. Love the chat. Really encourage you guys to volley back and forth, and we'll pull some of the comments in when it makes sense to do so, and try to engage there as well. He says that being there instead of TV, it was obvious Teddy doesn't trust his throws to wide receivers. I have a question to you on that one, because I think that's certainly one angle to take on that. The other question I have for you is that also potentially Teddy not trusting his offensive line? We saw a fair amount of pressure, particularly from the left-hand side of the line where Reisner was and Cushenberry. The Eagles have a very good defensive front. Anderson had a couple issues, but by and large, I still thought he did okay. He wasn't awful, but he wasn't great. He certainly wasn't as good as he was against the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys have a slightly smaller defensive front than the Philadelphia Eagles, so that may have had something to do with it. Whereas, I don't know if you guys saw from the Dallas game, Anderson actually tripped and still blocked his guy from his knees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, that had me come up off the couch and just saying, are you kidding me? So when you looked at the Eagles game, the left-hand side of our offensive line really did struggle quite a bit, whereas we had the right-hand side of our offensive line that was seemingly doing much better. And we also had the pulling guard of Quinn Miners when we were running to the left, where he would sweep around, and that seemed to make all the difference in the world. So the question is, do you think that's the wide receivers, or do you think that was the offensive line, or could it just be a combination of both?
I really don't want to say it was the offensive line, Rich, to be honest with you, because the Broncos actually struggled more against the Dallas defensive line, where the Cowboys had 4 sacks on the day, versus this one against Philadelphia. I think Bridgewater only got sacked once, maybe. I can't think up off the top of my head, but he might have gotten hit, but he didn't get sacked as much as he did against the Dallas line. And like we keep saying, Rich, the Philadelphia front defensive line is very good. I mean, they have Fletcher Cox, they have Hargrave, and I forget the name of the other big guy that they have on there. So while they didn't always get in,
was it Hargraves?
Yeah, Hargrave. Yeah,
was it Hargraves? I think it was Hargraves.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
So, and while they always didn't get home to Bridgewater, they always did enough. But you guys got to remember that Bridgewater is one of the quarterbacks in the league that leads in time of possession with the ball, which means he is one of the quarterbacks that holds the ball the longest in the pocket. So the time to throw is there. The bad thing is that either he's not reading his plays, or he's not making them, or he tries to scramble in between the linemen. And every time you see any quarterback, scrambling with the ball, you always hesitate. You always hold your breath, because you don't know if they're going to slide. You don't know if they're going to dive, or you don't know that even if they do slide, that somebody's going to come from behind and hit them and concuss them and they get hurt. So while it's not always encouraged for quarterbacks to scramble and run, you want to see some type of play from Teddy Bridgewater. And with that being said, guys, I also want to say that for those of you that are calling for Bridgewater to be benched, or there were some that even said that the Broncos should have considered trading him back to the Saints before the trade deadline and bringing in Drew Lock. As much as I love Drew Lock, you have to face it. Drew Lock is not this isn't 2019. He's not going to come in like he did for Joe Flacco and blow the doors open, and that's just not how it's going to happen. As much as
you also have to remember, we don't have the same offensive coordinator either. So Drew Lock was brought in to run what it appears, at least, was the Rick Scangarello / Shanahan-ish-esque style offense.
Mm-hmm.
We simply just don't have the offensive play callers on the Denver Broncos who call plays that are like that. That being said, we do have a few plays that are very similar in that general vein with the pulling guards that we've seen as of late in the last 2 games. Both the Dallas and the Eagles game had a couple plays like that. Problem is, we're just not calling them frequently enough. And therefore, some of our guards, like, Graham Glasgow is now out for the year, but he was really struggling in particularly in the run game when he was going kind of one-on-one. And then Dalton Reisner's really had he's really struggled this year. However, when you're now seeing him pull, like I was saying, Quinn Miners, when you're seeing him pull and go in motion like that, he is actually performing much, much better. I did want to quickly pull up here, JB. I really do appreciate you making your comments. So please, I would prefer that you don't shut up, because I really enjoy reading them, and it's awesome to kind of see the banter back and forth in the chat. So I really do encourage you to keep commenting and pick apart what I'm saying and what 6'10" saying here. Really enjoy your participation. The other thing that I will say, and I actually want your take on this, 6'10".
Mm-hmm.
You made a comment earlier, but we already know what Drew Lock is, and et cetera, as it pertains to Teddy and how he was doing. Here's my question for you then. If Teddy has all that time to throw, and he is not throwing his receivers open, because clearly there's going to be at least 1 or 2 throws normally on every play where you can throw your receivers open. And since that was one of the biggest knocks on Drew Lock, and on top of that, since we're also hearing Teddy struggling to throw fast enough balls to make it downfield without floating them a little bit, would you not think that at this point of the season, you may as well see what you have in Drew Lock after learning a little bit under Teddy, given the fact that he's different and he has some of the things. Basically, Drew has a lot of the things that Teddy doesn't, right?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And that actually brings up the point that we have from our good friend Dave Glassman here, who says, at this point, we have nothing to lose. Let's see if Drew has progressed so that we can plan for the future. And while there is some truth to that, I have to kind of disagree with that because the only way you can say we have nothing to lose is if the Broncos are officially eliminated from postseason contention. And at this point, they are not. And like I just restated to you earlier, while I do love Drew Lock, I love what he's done with the team the last 2-3 years he's been here. But at this point, he's officially been dubbed the backup quarterback. And that's just really what he is. If you start Drew Lock against the Chargers next week, I don't really think you're going to see an improvement. And by improvement, it's like, yeah, he has a stronger arm than Teddy Bridgewater. There's no doubt about that. But what are the chances that we're not going to see the Drew Lock from last year where he just throws the ball and the interception numbers go up and then people start complaining, bench Drew Lock. So I don't think that and Drew Lock had his chance. That Baltimore Ravens game where he came in for Teddy Bridgewater, that was Drew Lock's chance to come in and say, hey, look, here's what I'm going to do. I'm bringing to the table. You guys made a mistake benching me. That was his chance. And for 2 quarters, he could not get – I don't even think the Broncos got into the red zone, if I'm not mistaken. In that
They
game.
didn't, but I'm going to push back a little bit on that one as well. We also did not go into heavy sets. We did not go into 12 personnel. We kept in the 3 wide sets. Everything is about – so here, and I'll explain kind of why I think that matters. Look at Mac Jones with the New England Patriots this year.
Mm-hmm.
They have tailored an offense to surround him and play to his strengths, minimize his weaknesses, and more importantly, leverage the overall strengths on their roster. There's a reason why New England is kind of sneaky good this year, but they're very much being overshadowed just because Buffalo is the new 800-pound gorilla in their division right now, right? With Josh Allen. That being said, when you look at what they're doing in New England, it is pretty darn good, and they have a pretty good record as a result. So that's what you do when you have a quarterback and you build around them. You build a scheme to fit the players that you have on your team. Whereas when you look at what we did with Drew Lock when he stepped in for Teddy Bridgewater, we didn't alter our offense. We didn't modify our offensive scheme to fit Drew Lock's strengths. We didn't have the flanking tight ends on the other side of the tackles to help them out with pass protection and give Drew a little bit more time to process what's on the field, because that has in fact been an issue with Drew Lock, which is processing time. He takes longer to process, whereas Teddy processes faster, but then he's more risk averse than Drew, whereas Drew is more risk taker, which is why we saw more interceptions from him. So you just hope that Drew at this stage in his career has developed a little bit more so that he can understand more of what he's seeing, so that when he takes those risks, they are more calculated than they were last year.
Well, and another reason I don't think the Broncos, especially George Paton, are going to bench Teddy Bridgewater over Drew Lock is just for the simple fact that Teddy Bridgewater was one of the very first acquisitions that George Paton made in the offseason. So the Broncos gave up not a huge amount of money, but they're paying Bridgewater more than they're paying Drew Lock. And if Teddy Bridgewater isn't hurt, then there's really no point in paying Bridgewater that much money for him to ride the bench. Now, while his gameplay hasn't been, like Zach Wilson terrible, it's kind of just like he's had some ups and he had some downs. And I'm willing to bet that unless Bridgewater gets hurt again, where they have no choice but to start Drew Lock, that's the only way we're going to see Drew Lock hit the field. Not if he comes in as a starter, it's because Teddy Bridgewater can't go. And we saw what happened in the Cleveland game, Rich. I mean, Teddy Bridgewater should not have started in that game. I mean, he was beat up from that game against the Steelers. And yet, in only 4 days rest, the coaching staff decided to put Bridgewater out there limping and not at 100%.
I'd like to include leadership in that decision as well. George Paton, Vic Fangio. I just want to include all of them in that, because I think that they would have all had a say in what happened and who played, especially since you're talking about your starting quarterback. And I'm using air quotes there because I think on many teams, Teddy would probably be a backup, a darn good one. Don't get me wrong. But I think on many teams, he would be a backup because I think people would see a ceiling with him. So I still think that the scheme that you put around a quarterback matters. I still think that the people that you have on your roster are perhaps the most critical in that situation. And if you're trying to play a scheme that does not suit the players that you have on the team, and you're not playing a scheme that suits the quarterback that is under center, then you're going to lose. I mean, it's just as simple as that. You're going to lose. And if I can just kind of go into a little bit here in terms of what I saw in the Eagles game, I do have a handful of notes. I have about a page and a half here in front of me. I'm not going to go into all of them, just the first little clip here, which is against the Eagles. This is in direct contrast, actually, to the Cowboys game. We played in 3 wide receiver sets in the first half 14 times in terms of snaps. And I'm including the ones that we got called penalties back because we actually then doubled down and just played the same play again in every single instance I watched. Which is, I laughed, but I actually made a note of that. And I said, we didn't change. And then in the 2 tight end packages or 12 personnel, we played in that 7 times. So, and if you want to compare to what we did against the Cowboys when we were really successful as a team, those numbers were kind of closer to, say, something more along the lines of 12-9 or 11-10, where it was like a 45% in the 45% in the 2 tight end sets and 55% out of the 3 wide sets. And that allowed us to get better protection for our quarterback. We were able to let plays develop further downfield. JB, I really do appreciate your comment earlier about Shermer and Shula both liking kind of longer wide receiver routes. They do take some time to develop. So if you give your quarterback more time to throw, I got into a little bit on Twitter earlier before the show about time to throw stats. That makes a difference because then you're able to let those routes develop more and allow guys like Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton in particular, really likes those kind of long winding routes that develop, and he does really well in them.
Yeah, no. And it's just crazy how, like, as much as you want to, and we talked about this before the show also, Rich, we could sit here and talk about almost every single bad thing that happened in that game. But as we get into the Mahai Mountain here, Rich, it was kind of hard to try to find like the positives and, just trying to kind of put away all the negative stuff that happened and try to be like, okay, well, even though A, B, C happened, at least, 1, 2, and maybe 3, So.
I have 2 positives if you like to hear them.
Sure.
I like I said, I have a lot of notes here, so I can just pick from them. I want to make a comment. I saw Weatherly jump out on from the game for me again, yet they played him less, which boggled my mind. Weatherly really and truly did exactly what Mundungus and I were talking about, particularly Mundungus, who brought it up on the pod. And I do want to give credit there where credit's due. I just happen to agree with exactly what he said. So yes, which is Weatherly not only rushes the passer really well from the edge. I am super impressed with the Angry Aviator. Yes, that's going to stick as a name. And but he also contains. So he holds his lane to keep that gap discipline in the run game as well. So for a guy like Jalen Hurts, as an example, what you saw from Malik Reed is Weatherly forced his way to keep in his lane and hold that. And when Weatherly was on, Hurts couldn't bounce to the outside on Weatherly's side because he was basically in his way, right? Mm-hmm. When you saw Reed in there, Reed couldn't get around, so he cut in, and then Hurts was able to just end around him, basically, and then get an open run lane because Reed had to cut inside. So I would say Weatherly, again, jumped out at me for just discipline. He was awesome. I love that pickup. That was a phenomenal pickup. And then the other one is Quinn Miners. I mean, if you really want to look at a legit positive, I mean, there's a third. I mean, Javonte, again, blew the doors off and really kind of showed that he's a special kind of running back. And we should be very pleased that we picked him up in the draft. But I mean, Quinn Miners as an offensive guard, especially when we've seen Reisner struggle and Glasgow kind of be a bit of a revolving door because he's always hurt. He's either on the bench or he's off the bench, and he gets hurt again. He goes back on the bench. So I think it's super important that we end up with a guard like Miners on our team who is really showing out and proves that he should be a starter on our team. He is that good. And more importantly, he has proven to be scheme versatile. He's been able to act as a pulling guard and then block properly in motion. But he has also shown that he can play in the power run game and the power game, which is what Shermer likes to kind of run there a little bit more out of the 3 wide sets. And Quinn is perfect for that. And that exactly, in terms of what I said earlier, Miners exemplifies why it's so important to have players that fit the scheme that you're running. And Miners fits the scheme that Shermer is running. So you put him in there and you leave him there. Full stop. And those are my 3 positives. And I think they're all worth mentioning. And, given how we played, let's at least hold on to those so that we don't go insane.
Rich, and I think that makes a nice segue into one of the staples of this show, which is the Mile High
Mountain.
Oh, yeah. I never get tired of seeing that.
I could do with a double yodel in there. I love the double yodel.
Hey, shout out to the boss for
Yeah, that was great.
his creative juices are always flowing at all times of the day. But Rich, and you and I were kind of comparing notes in terms of our Mile High Mountains, and they might be somewhat similar as we go into this segment. So I'll let you go first, my friend.
Sure. So like I said, I got my notes. Always organized and ready to go. So on the summit, I have Quinn Miners. I think it's no secret based on my previous comments there. I have been super impressed with Quinn, his ability to be scheme versatile, show the ability to block in both styles that we were playing as an offense. He is atop the summit for me, especially in the game against the Eagles, because from a team that really, really struggled, he was a very, very bright spot, and it was clear that he was probably either the best player or very close to the best player on that pitch there for us. On the climb for me, I had Tim Patrick. Now this one here, I could have gone with like 1 or 2 other guys. I opted to go with Tim because I really thought Tim, he did some dirty work in that game, and a lot of that kind of stuff gets overlooked for wide receivers. Tim Patrick had a few key blocks on the edges in some of the run plays where he was on the edges. And I really think that gets overlooked by so many people. And he also had a few really, really solid catches, which he's Tim Patrick. I think I've only seen him drop the ball, I think, once in 2 years. So that's awesome. And then at base camp, I have Teddy Bridgewater. I just thought that he didn't have a good game. He missed wide open receivers. He did not go deep down the field. So I had Teddy Bridgewater in my base camp. And last but not least, this might surprise some people because I've been very, very I defended him a lot, actually. I have Vic Fangio and Ed Donatel in my on the plate ride home. I just felt that our defensive game plan, we did not change up what we needed to do in order to match and beat the Eagles. We kept on getting beat using the same players on the field, particularly on the interior defensive line. We saw our interior defensive line change up and actually substitute more with more of the bigger guys in there, where we saw Harris, Stevens, and Williams in there all at the same time, where we saw some bigger sets in the interior defensive line. I wanted to see more of that kind of mixing up of the interior. We did not see that. And I saw a lot. I was rewatching parts of the game earlier before the show. I was seeing both Shelby Harris and Draymond Jones both getting held off by a single Eagles interior offensive lineman with one arm. So we were all making comments how Moody was able to do that with some of the guys on some of the opposing interior defensive linemen that we were up against before. We were seeing that with our 2 other interior guys, and those are my Mile High Mountain picks.
Very well, my friend. Well, this is one of the rare occasions, Rich, where you and I have the exact same pick at the top of the mountain, because Quinn Miners was also my top pick for the summit. I mean, this man just seems to be getting better and better by the week. So hopefully this bye week doesn't take away any momentum he's been building up since he took over for Glasgow, and he only continues to get better. On the rise, climbing up the summit, I have Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons had an interception in this game, and there were a couple of plays where he looked like he may have gotten had the best of him, but I don't think that it was anything terrible, So I think that Justin Simmons, once you let Simmons be on his own and have the cornerbacks do what they're supposed to do instead of always having to drop him to come in, for support, then Justin Simmons can be really, really dangerous in doing what he does. And at the bottom of the summit, it's a tie between Melvin Gordon and Teddy Bridgewater for me. Even though Melvin Gordon did have the only score for the Broncos, you cannot fumble the ball especially on 4th down and 1. I mean, the Broncos had the conversion. All Melvin Gordon had to do was just head straight down. Ball security has always been his Achilles heel. And, not only did he drop the ball or fumble the ball, the defense got the ball back and they ran it back. And then, of course, as we've been talking for like the last, half hour or so, the whole thing with Bridgewater just stepping aside and letting Darius Slay run the ball back. And to me, that was a really, really bad play because that literally was what took the momentum away from the Broncos. The Broncos were in the running of it up until that point, but after they fell behind 2 scores, then it became 3 scores, and then when the game just became unreachable, it was just, it was like another day in the office for Fangio. And of course, the summit on the plane ride home, Vic Fangio is going to have to do it for me. I know me and you talked about earlier. I did want to put Mike Shula in that on that plane ride home, but at the same time, I after thinking about it before we went live on the air, it was his first game as the offensive coordinator. It'll be interesting to see if the Broncos move ahead with him going forward when they come back from their break against the Chargers, but I don't really think that's going to happen. I think that the reins are going to be given back to Shermer once he clears a COVID-19 protocol. But one thing's for sure on that front, Rich, the answer for, the next offensive coordinator in Denver is not at home or in-house.
I'm not willing to quite go that far yet. So where I'd like to see is Shula, in fact, I believe Mundungus and I went into this a little bit, actually, in terms of on the Broncos Talk in which you were absent for last week. And we went into this a little bit. Shula and Shermer are very, very similar offensively. They have a similar scheme. They have a similar approach, et cetera, et cetera. Where you start getting into deviation from that is Munchak. Munchak is far more in the same vein or similar vein to someone like Scangarello in terms of style and whatnot. So from my perspective, if we are collectively as a Broncos A, organization, and B, fan base looking at this saying, all right, Shula ain't it, Shermer ain't it, then from my perspective, you nix them both and send them packing. And you say, if we believe that we can, and this bye week would potentially be the week where you'd want to do something like that, because then you would have a guy like Munchak being able to have an extended period of time to game plan and put stuff together, install maybe a package or two to help the transition over to what his style is going to be. And we can see where we can go from there. Ultimately, in my opinion, from what I can see from our offensive line and from our quarterbacks, they would probably both do far better under a Munchak style offense and a Rick Scangarello style offense than a Shermer one.
As I have read articles, and matter of fact, that also agree with that statement, Rich, where they feel that right now is the time to get rid of Shermer, and if you want to go as far as Mike Shula as well. But we have to remember that those coaches, at least in my personal opinion, they seem to be protected by Vic Fangio. So,
I would say they're protected by Elway and maybe even Peyton, but
I wouldn't say Peyton as much. Elway I would, because they were here during the Elway regime. So, and George Payton, while, in his first year, I know he stepped on a couple of toes and he's still kind of walking on eggshells in terms of the whole Von Miller trade situation. But I really don't see them losing their jobs unless the Broncos really hit some type of slump, and I mean like a really terrible slump
Right.
against the Chargers, like they get shut out, or Bridgewater throws for like 4 interceptions. I mean, something bad has to really happen where George Payton or even Vic Fangio would have no choice but to turn around and say, "Hey, our season is in real jeopardy, and we've given you time, and it's not working out." And then drastic measures would probably cost Pat Shurmur his job. And I don't really know if bringing in Mike Shula would be the answer to fix that. I would give a chance to Mike Munchak to see what he can do, because he has been a head coach in his career. But the question is, would a turnaround of that short amount of time be enough for Munchak to kind of turn that offense around and say, "Hey, look, we're going to make it through the playoffs with what we got"? And I'm in agreement with you. If change is going to happen, it needs to happen now. It needs to happen before week 12 when the Broncos go see the Chargers.
Yeah, in my opinion, what I think we need to do is we need to install elements of a Munchak offense to add into our playbook. And what you do with that is you basically leverage this extended time that you have during the bye to allow the players to learn new schemes. Because what's clear to me right now when I'm watching this is we're getting beat using the schemes that we're using right now. So you take this time, you install some new schemes, probably from the Munchak offense style, where you'd end up with like the pulling guards and more motion type stuff. And you install a couple sets like that to kind of just get it going. And then come early in the game against the Chargers, Shurmur is basically being Shurmur and isn't looking very good, then I think you start bringing in the Munchak plays, 2, 3, or 4 of them that we've kind of learned, if you will, over this bye week, more into play, as well as the pulling guards, which, by the way, is also a hallmark of a Munchak offense, is the pulling guards that we're seeing more and more, not more and more, but that we're starting to see against Dallas. So if we start seeing that more kind of creep onto the field, I have a funny feeling we're going to see a bit of a different offense for the Denver Broncos, because Reisner will start to look better. He won't be getting pushed back as often because he's doing what he's good at, which is blocking in motion.
Mm-hmm.
And Miners is versatile, so he can do either. So that's great. Basically, my point is that you have to scheme and put on the field something that is fitting of your players' strengths. Right now, I believe that our offensive coordinator says, "Be damned with what your strengths are. This is what I want to run. Now go do it." And that is the wrong approach. If you want to go in that approach, that is totally fine. But then that is on your GM, and that is going back to John Elway, to draft accordingly. And we did not draft for a Shurmur style offense. We drafted for a Scangarello style offense, and the two are not the same, and they're looking for different skill sets.
Right. Well, one thing we have to keep in mind, Rich, and it's something that a lot of people are, I would say, overlooking, is the fact that the pressure is on George Payton as general manager at the very half of the season to see what he's going to do. Because bringing in Teddy Bridgewater was one of his assignments. It wasn't something that, Vic Fangio or anybody else on the offense wanted to do. This was a guy that he wanted to bring in because he felt that his veteranship and leadership would take the Broncos to the next level, into the Super Bowl. So right now, all eyes are on him to try to see how he can fix it. Because obviously Vic Fangio's defense, which for the last 2 years was always the staple in, holding the team together when the offense was playing like crap, it's not working out. So we can't count on the Vic Fangio defense because they're not playing up to par. The Pat Shurmur / Mike Shula offense isn't really working up to par. Or in Shurmur's case, it's kind of like one really great game and then 2, 3 really bad ones. And we're getting to the point of the season, Rich, where we don't have a safety net anymore. We can't afford to keep losing games like some of these other teams that have only lost 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4. So with every single loss that comes towards the Broncos' way, it's going to hurt their chances to mathematically make the postseason. And if the Broncos don't make the postseason, that's going to look bad, really bad on everybody. And then heads should roll come the end of the season.
Right. Well, in fairness, we've seen Mike Purcell regress. Okay. I think that's a fair comment to make. He has regressed substantially from where he was before. And a staple in a Vic Fangio defense is pressure in the middle of the field that kind of helps contain the quarterback. That truly helps contain the quarterback. And I also agree. I understand that there's been some that are saying one thing and others another. That Teddy was a Fangio and Shermer decision. I'm gonna say it's possible that it was a Fangio and Shermer decision to name the starting quarterback.
Yeah, I believe that as well.
However, I have to imagine that George Payton's relationships played a pretty big role in bringing him here. Mm-hmm. And I have to also imagine that Elway, even though Locke was a draft pick of his, I could see Elway getting really pissed off with what happened with that whole COVID thing where Drew Lock tried to hide the fact that he wasn't wearing the proximity bracelet. Mm-hmm. I could see something like that rubbing a guy like Elway the wrong way. I think Elway is okay with off-field discretions, but I think that someone like I think someone like Elway, who is pretty conservative, generally speaking, would certainly see what Drew Lock did as a bridge too far. Now, when we look at what moving forward with our offense, I'd like to get some comments in here. Based on what we've seen this season, what would you guys like to see more of? We've seen offensive styles where we have run heavily. That would be like Dallas Cowboys, for example, where we actually decided to not abandon the run. Yay. And then we've seen other games earlier and mid-season where we lost a few there to the Ravens and the Steelers and whatnot, where we were more pass happy and less run intensive. So I'm very curious to see what would you all like to see us play? Would you like to see us more run-centric, heavier sets, maybe more tight ends on the field in terms of extra blocking and whatnot? Or would you like to see us try to lean more on the 3 wide sets and find a way of making those work through some more creative play calling, which may in fact mean, as you and I were talking about earlier, moving on from one or both of the quasi-offensive coordinators in Shermer and Shula.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what people think.
Yeah. And, as we head into this bye week, Rich, I think that the Broncos, not only do they need to study and burn the tape afterwards of this Philadelphia game, but they just need to find an answer. They need to find an identity, because the schedule for them is only going to get harder as we go forward. We still have to play the Chargers twice. We still have to play the Chiefs twice, and the Chiefs seem to have found a second wind. We have a rematch with the Raiders, who we've already lost a game to. Plus, we still have to the Bengals don't really scare as much anymore. And the Lions, the Lions are the Lions. And I forget who the other game is against. But either way, this team is far from, being able to say safely that, they'll be a wild card team or a playoff team. Their work is cut out for them, and they just basically need to find what works best for them. Like you said, are they going to be a running team? Are they going to be a throwing team? Are they, what type of identity or team do they want to be going forward? And just basically, Teddy Bridgewater has to win the locker room back, because from this game, he's lost them. And for how long he's lost them is a whole different thing. So hopefully he can find a way to kind of, win the team back and say, okay, I messed up here. Let's just kind of be the Bridgewater that we fell over with from week 1 to week 3. That's the guy we want back.
Sure. So I just want to bring in Jay Bryan, 7861's comment here. I know 2 things I'd like not to see: 8-yard pass on 3rd and 10, a draw handoff up the middle on 2nd and 12. So I agree with the second, the draw handoff, no dice on 2nd and 12. And what I'm going to push back a little bit on is the 8-yard pass on 3rd and 10. There is some analytics. I was reading up on this because I've seen this comment a couple times, and I've seen this on Twitter a few times. And I myself was wondering, that seems silly. You've not got the first down because you're throwing short of the sticks. That makes no sense whatsoever. The interesting thing is the analytics show that, typically speaking, if you this is for other teams, obviously not the Broncos, but generally speaking across the league, when you throw just a yard or 2 shy of the sticks on 3rd down, when you're looking to try and gain that yardage with a proper scheme, which Shermer obviously doesn't have, you're more likely than not to actually get that 3rd down conversion. So there is some analytics behind going in that direction. The problem is you need a proper scheme in order to make those analytics work. And obviously a Shermer led offense does not lead to success in that situation, as we've seen so much this year. And then we've got a couple other comments here to the open-ended question that I released to the group earlier. Love to see more running the ball. I agree. Gordon up the middle. I'm going to add a caveat to that comment personally. Again, open to people saying that I am wrong. Gordon has a propensity to hold the ball with one hand when he is going up the middle in really critical and really crucial situations. I would really love to see, again, I brought this up on Broncos Talk last week. I would really, really love to see Demaria Crockett come in as a bigger, stronger back, similar to Gordon, maybe with not quite as good hands in terms of the passing game, but certainly capable. I would love to see a guy like Demaria Crockett come in who has shown that he hasn't really fumbled like Gordon is known to in those critical situations. We've seen him do it twice now. Javonte Williams has done it once. So maybe we give Javonte Williams another go at it. But ultimately speaking, at the end of the day, Gordon has done well in normal situations. However, when the game is on the line or the really important situations, Gordon has certainly shown just that propensity to play fast and loose with holding the ball with 2 hands and holding it close to his body and protecting that football.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And then my cousin coming in here saying, when your opponent has the better quarterback, you should be concerned, talking about the Bengals. Now, if you were talking about the Bengals that started the season, I'd be in total agreement with you. But the Bengals seem to be on a bit of a downslide.
They looked so good earlier in the season, and I mean, they looked just almost unbeatable.
Yeah, and that's my point. If we were going up against those Bengals, I totally agree with you. Like I wouldn't think that the Broncos would have no chance. But when that team goes out and lost to the Jets the way that they did, it's kind of like, I'm not saying that the Broncos are going to steamroll the Bengals. I'm just saying that the Broncos have a chance of beating the Bengals if that's the team that shows up to play that day.
So you're saying there's a chance?
Yeah, there's a chance. But then again, there's a chance that we could see the Cincinnati Bengals that stomped out the Ravens,
Right.
So, I mean, anything can happen. But then again, we'll have to see which quarterback will show up to play that day for either team, knock on wood, hopefully. And yeah, like the boss says, that's what we said about the Eagles.
Right.
And, I couldn't agree with you more there, boss. And it almost seems like maybe we jinxed ourselves in, bringing that up. And I can't find any other words to say. Like, I couldn't imagine being a fan there on Sunday, because it wasn't like a sea of green out there, but you could see green jerseys out there, and I'm pretty sure that the Eagles fans were more than ecstatic, letting the Broncos fans know.
You and I spoke about this earlier before we came into the pod, though. I said this before we literally just before we went live, is we had a game plan against the Cowboys to force the Cowboys to try to play to us. We came into the Eagles game with a game plan where we were trying to play to the Eagles on what seemed to be actually on both sides of the ball. Our offensive game plan, we completely abandoned those heavy, like pass pro, flanking tight ends, the bigger guys on the field to really push the Eagles around. We completely went away from that. Just think of what some of those runs could have been if we had the flanking tight ends and really threw guys around. I mean, some of those runs could have been just wicked dangerous. And then on the defensive side of the ball, we again deviated from what worked against the Cowboys, which was changing out some of the lighter interior defensive linemen. I'm going to call out a name. I know it's not popular within Broncos country, but Draymond Jones is a lighter interior defensive lineman who in many schemes would be seen as better suited in a 4-3 defense instead of a 3-4. And he has had a few successful plays. He had a kind of a pressure, or not quite a sack, but certainly a pressure against Hurts in this game. But aside from that, he has genuinely struggled overall. Seemingly looks like he's getting a little bit better. So, that's good to see, but he's still struggling with getting pressure. Same with Shelby Harris. Shelby Harris has struggled with getting that interior push in the middle of the field and forcing guys like Hurts to come off their first read. And that's going to force a guy like that to struggle. So, yes, you need to mix things up. You need to play your football and force the other team to try to play to you. Now, if you start going down by 20 or 15 or 13 or something, then that's a different story. You need to try and find a different game plan. But we didn't even attempt to do that. We came in with a completely different game plan, kept on falling behind, and never changed.
Yeah. So as we get towards the end of the show, Rich, heading into the bye week, what do you feel the Broncos need to do to try to make a comeback? What changes, aside from firing the coaches, which we've already talked about, what changes do you think that the Broncos as a whole need to make in terms of trying to get ready for the Chargers?
I think we need to revisit our offensive scheme and game plan. I think we need to go back to what worked for us versus the Cowboys. I think we need to go back to what worked for us in the preseason and in the games that we won, which was more 12 personnel, less 11 personnel. And I do agree with Dave. I actually think that if we go in a different scheme, Drew Lock, or I even suggested on Twitter the other day that I would be completely open to Brett Rippon coming in, because this coming off season is going to be, I actually think this is going to be the most turmoil the Broncos have seen in years. We're going to end up with eventually some form of decision on ownership, which is going to be huge. That could mean one of several things. I'm not going to go into them now, but it could be one of several things. So that'll be super interesting for us as Broncos fans. And I think we need to change up some of the defensive players. I think Purcell needs to come off the field. Fuller showed that he is good in rotation, but not good as a full-time starter, and we should not be relying on him. And I absolutely agree with Mundungus here. The Angry Aviator needs to be our starter. Full stop, period. On the edge, because we saw what worked the game prior in the Cowboys, and that was the Angry Aviator on one side and Jonathan Cooper on the other.
I totally agree with you there, Rich. I just think that the Broncos just need to reload. We need Bradley Chubb back out on that field. Hopefully, he should be more than good to go by week. What is it? I keep saying 11, but no, it's 12. So we need him out there, And while Malik Reed hasn't been the best, he hasn't been the worst. So.
No, a lot of his pressures and sacks have come from coverages as opposed to him beating his man. Jonathan Cooper's pressures and Weatherly's pressures actually against Dallas came from actually beating their man on the other side. So I'm going to kind of push back just a little bit on that. I did want to bring up Dave Glassman's comment here. Dave, I really, really appreciate you joining us this evening. While I would rather see Rippon than Teddy, he doesn't bring anything new to the table. I'm going to disagree with that. I actually think that Rippon showed in that one start that he had that he brings the acumen of a Teddy Bridgewater and a little bit of youth that Teddy Bridgewater does not have. And I think that is something new to the table. There is a large part of me that is wondering if Teddy Bridgewater's issues are a direct result of the fact that he is basically 60 years old out there because he's had so many hits. He holds onto the ball so long, and he has done most of his career. And as a result, even this season, we've seen it already where he has been hit hard, missed time, et cetera, and we've seen what's happened, right? So I would argue that Brett brings a lot of the same things to the table that Teddy does. He is a cerebral quarterback. He reads defense as well. And I think he has a reasonable arm, not a great arm, just like Teddy, a reasonable arm, not a great arm. However, Brett is young and he's not hurt. And I actually have a funny feeling that bringing in a guy who is, we'll call him Teddy-esque in terms of the way he plays, maybe something that we might need to do and should do. At the end of the day, like I said, we're going to go into probably a turmoil state at the end of this season. We should see what we have in all three quarterbacks looking ahead to next season, because we need to know who we keep, who we don't. I think we know that Drew's probably gone. Then the question is, do we bring back Teddy, or do we maybe just keep Rippon and then bring in a new quarterback and then keep Rippon as that QB2?
Well, I'm unfortunately going to have to agree with Dave on this one. I don't think that Rippon is the answer. Rippon would be the guy that's like, okay, the season's gone to crap. It's not, the Broncos aren't making the playoffs. Let's see what we got out of him. But unfortunately, Rippon is still quarterback number 3. So he would have to find a way to get past Drew Lock in order for that to happen. Not to take anything away from Brett. Brett has had his highlights, especially when he took over in that Jets game last year. But you also have to remember he had 3 really, really bad interceptions in that game. So while he does have his ups, he has his downs. And I don't think that Brett Rippon is the guy who you would hand the keys over and say, take us to, the playoffs and further. I'm pretty sure he's a good guy to have in a pinch if your starting quarterback goes down. Yeah. And she's probably
Hey Bree, how you doing?
Nice to see you, Bree. Thanks for joining us. But he could be the guy who, makes the quarterback 2 position next season. Who knows what's going to happen. But just basically kind of just backtrack and, bring in the point. The Broncos were supposed to go into this bye week with momentum that they've built up the last 2 weeks. And, they could have swept the NFC East, but unfortunately that didn't happen. So as much as we want to sit here and pout and complain, we have to keep our fingers crossed and hope that those that are hurting heal. And when we go back to work next week, that the Broncos come back even hungrier, they come back even better, that the coaching staff kind of finds a way to play better, because the losses, they cannot keep mounting up. They can't keep happening. The excuses can't keep coming back and saying, pointing fingers, it's whose fault, it's my fault. It just, this team is so much better than their record states, Rich. They're just so much better. And we hear it all the time.
Certainly have the talent on the roster. I absolutely agree with you. Just pulling up Bree's comment here. Bree, I really appreciate you coming in and joining us, taking the time. You're more than welcome to come and get loud on Broncos Talk whenever you would like. Please reach out and we'll get you scheduled in. I'd love to hear. I followed a bunch of your pods already, so I'm happy to have you come in and give your insights and get loud and likely disagree with me a fair amount, and that is perfectly fine. I absolutely love going back and forth about football and our Denver Broncos.
No, I totally agree, Bree. You're always welcome here on the MHRT Network. It's always a pleasure to have you when you have the time. But just to kind of, bring the point back home, Rich, the Broncos are still in this, even though they're 4th in the division. I think I could have sworn I seen them in 4th.
Tied for 3rd.
Tied for 3rd. Okay.
Which is we'll call it honorary 4th. How's that?
Honorary 4th. Yeah. So if this coming week, while the Broncos are off, if the Chiefs, the Raiders, and the Chargers could find it in their hearts to lose, I would think that would be some very extra, just that would bring some enthusiasm in terms of, especially with the game. Our game coming back is against the Chargers, and they could absolutely take this division back, and not only take it back, Rich, but keep that lead.
Thank you, Dave.
And earn a spot in the playoffs. So just keep in mind, guys, the Broncos are not out of this. They're far out of this yet. Yes, the loss to the Eagles sucks. It's terrible, but we're going into the second half of the season. All the mistakes that the Broncos have made, they kind of have to sit down and work around them, try to find the answer. And so far, the answer starts with the quarterback. The quarterback play needs to be better. The defense, the coverages, they need to be better. The players running those coverages, they need to play better, because as we saw against Devontae Smith, he ate us up for 2 touchdowns, Rich. And if I'm not mistaken, the Broncos defense, I think, is the only team that has given up 2 touchdown plays to a rookie wide receiver so far this year. At least I think that's right. I don't know. I have to go back and check my notes, but I could have sworn that's how it was. But either way, there was no way that Devontae Smith, as good as a wide receiver was in college, that he should have been able to get that open. And even worse for Jalen Hurts to have that much time in the pocket to make those type of throws.
The one thing I'm going to add to your list of things is I've been pretty consistent on this. I've spoken with Nick Kendall of Mile High Huddle, amongst others, Andrew Mason and Albright and a whole bunch of other folks. We really need interior defensive line pressure. We are not getting it. And we got the edges where we were able to get some contain and seal on those edges when we were playing Dallas. We completely moved away from that. And we need to get that interior defensive line pressure. So I'd like to see better interior in the dead center of the defense play. So if that means Purcell rides the bench a little bit more because he's not playing up to par, so be it. If that means that Draymond Jones or Shelby Harris, who have been pushed around with one arm by the Eagles offensive linemen in this last game, get less playing time, okay. Put other guys in there and mix it. I'm not even saying take them out and have them ride the bench. What I'm saying is mix up the rotations. If what you have out there is not working, change it. Just like on offense, if what you're doing on offense right now is not working, change it. Not hard, pretty simple. As a fan, I'm already looking at it and looking at what you're doing as an offensive coordinator. I have my notes here. All of our really big run plays came from the 12 personnel sets against the Eagles. I'm willing to bet that that's because the Eagles are a pretty large offensive line. I know that as a fan because I actually read numbers and I watched film. Crazy. And I looked at the Eagles' defensive line and said, they're a big bunch of guys and our offensive line are a bunch of backups. So if you want to protect your backups, force the runs, force the passes, give extra protection, then you run bigger sets. Instead, we ran less tight end sets against the Eagles, who are a larger defensive line than the Cowboys, and we got spanked. We got spanked.
Mm-hmm. No, and you're totally right. I don't disagree. And that's an issue that the Broncos have had ever since the Malik Jackson left, because Malik Jackson was one of those big guys in the interior middle. And while the Broncos have had great pass rushers in Von Miller and Bradley Chubb and I don't know, can you say Shane Ray? Maybe Shane Ray is a bit of a stretch, but I just feel that going into I don't know if you want to say free agency or maybe even the draft, since the Broncos seem to have good picks, they need to beef up that interior defensive line, because
they do.
That's what made Denver's outside pass rushers elite. You made every offensive line that you ran against struggle, and decide, are you going to block the inside guys or are you going to block the outside guys? And with Von Miller no longer being a Bronco, you don't want to give teams, you don't want to make that decision easier for a lot of other teams that come into Denver or when you go visit them at their home. So unfortunately, the trade deadline was over, and George Paton did have time to make a for a trade for not the best inside defensive lineman per se, but maybe a decent one. So, and you don't really want to bring in anybody off of free agency because I don't feel there's anybody that is.
Well, I'm a street free agent. I would make a fantastic tight end inside linebacker. I can play both because I played rugby, which is both offense and defense. So George Payton can give me a shout anytime. I'm cool with it. I'm sure that I could work something out at work where I could kind of practice and play and work at the same time. So you can go ahead and give me a call.
Oh, well, hopefully one of the NFL scouts is listening. And
you can call me the crazed Canuck. How's that?
All right, guys. Unfortunately, that's going to have to do it for our show tonight. Thank you guys so much for joining us in the chat. Bree, Jay, Brian, the boss Mundungus, Dave Glassman, as always, and anybody else who I may have missed. Avatar, thank you guys so much for joining us. And let me just remind you guys that if you enjoyed today's conversation and you enjoyed the show in general, make sure you tune in every single Tuesday with myself and at Richie at 7654 every single Tuesday. You can catch us live. And on Thursday, we have the flagship show, which is the MHRT podcast with myself, the boss Mundungus, the Glenn Doogie Hauser, and of course, Mr. Boggins himself. And then on Fridays, we have the Nothing Rhymes with podcast with our good friends, Johnny and Isaiah, which also airs at 7654. And then, of course, we have the new pregame show, which is The Neighborhood, which airs every single just a few hours before every single Broncos game. And I will reiterate that there will not be a pregame show since the Broncos are on a bye week. But we will be back next week with all new shows for you. So make sure you hit that thumbs up button, subscribe, so you get live notifications wherever you're watching us on social media, so you never miss out on any of our content. So, Rich, before we go, we have to do everybody's favorite part of the show, which is the Mile High Five. Rich, are you ready?
I'm good to go.
All right, here we go. Mile High Five! Woo! I almost missed my slap there.
Did you hit the ceiling?
Oh, I almost hit my light. That's how long my arms are. Oh, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you all next time. Hasta luego.
Go Broncos.